Welcome back to the 27. This is a setup analysis for the Metalmoro AJR V6 Turbo from the P1 racing category in AMS2. We will be taking a look at some of the details to try to see what we can learn about this car to potentially increase lap times with a few tips and few clicks of the setup screen. The AJR as a chassis concept was developed in 2017 for Brazil's Imperial Endurance Racing Series by a small 40-year-old automobile parts and chassis manufacturing company called Metalmoro in partnership with JLM Racing. Metalmoro's first prototype car was introduced back in 1999 to great success, and boy have they grown. Since that point, they developed the famous MRX chassis package, which we are familiar with some of the prototype subcategories in AMS2. But their crowning achievement thus far is the AJR. Designed in a series in which regulations are virtually non-existent, the AJR has the same look and style and aero design to, the Red Bull X 2014 concept, as well as other recognizable hypercars. This is what happens when you let Skynet take over the race engineering world. The first thing you'll notice when selecting a car from the P1 category in AMS2 is that there are 4 versions of the AJR, and this is because the car was designed to be adaptable to the different needs of their customer racing teams, and one of those needs is the ability to house different engines. So we have a naturally aspirated Chevrolet V8, a Honda 4-cylinder turbo, a naturally aspirated Judd V10, which is actually prohibited in real life from what I've read, and a V6 turbo that you see here on track, probably based on a supercharged V6 produced by Nissan in real life, or perhaps a Chevy V6 turbo. It could be one or the other. Besides the engine, everything in these cars is otherwise virtually identical. The setup pages will be the same. That's not to say they all drive the same, though. They have different weights, horsepower, torque, power-to-weight ratios, probably fuel consumption. The Chevy, Honda, and V6 have unlimited DRS. The Judd doesn't. The class of the field on a per-lap basis appears to be the Honda and not this V6, unfortunately. So when choosing the AJR in a multiplayer context, there you go. But the one thing I did want to talk about is power delivery. This is where the differences between the AJRs come into play. There are a couple of advantages and disadvantages to the turbos, the Honda and the V6. Turbos, as you know, maintain performance at any altitude, making them extraordinarily competitive the higher above sea level the track is located. However, the power delivery is a bit different. On the stat sheet, peak power is peak power. That's what you'll see, but how the power is delivered is the concern here. You will get more wheel slip from the turbos at different RPMs, and this wheel slip as a driver is what you will need to manage. Some people will like it, some may not. But being able to manage wheel slip with the wheel and pedals is one thing. Managing the effects this has on the tires is another. The turbos in particular, for inexperienced drivers or experienced drivers that aren't paying attention, rear tires for the AJRs will have a tendency to overheat. When they overheat compared to the fronts, they lose grip. When they lose grip balance, they overheat more, eventually leading to the risk of spinning out, and you'll see this in multiplayer all the time. People see the leaderboards, they know the Honda is superior, they take their driving style and a TT setup to the race, the rear tires overheat, and Bob's your uncle. There's 3 things you can do. First, recognize it. If your rear tires are more than 10 degrees C in temperature, more than the fronts with no sign of stopping, you're in trouble. Number 2, short shifting and acceleration zones can help. And number 3, add some rear wing and eat away at some of that precious straight line speed. As far as the setup is concerned, we made minor changes to several different areas of the V6. But what this build does for you is manages the car, its suspension, and ultimately the aero and tires, keeping it in a window of control and comfort much better than the default package. It will essentially maintain the same pace for long after the default setup will start to let you down. So let's take a look at the telemetry. Welcome to the world of racing sim tools, and here as usual I've registered 2 sessions, one with the default, one with the custom, and then you can see, if you can squint, my custom package was about 1 second faster on the third lap, which is actually pretty good. But also I registered a third session as well. That's a little special treat. I did a spin in the Honda Turbo as opposed to the V6 Turbo, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. But first, let's talk about temps, shall we? So if you look at the default package, at the end of the lap, on the third lap, the tire deltas between the fronts and the rears was 64 degrees Celsius in the front, 77 degrees Celsius in the rear. That is, well, 77, 78, 77. That's 13 to 14C. That's in the danger zone. That's when you are going to be, you should be very, very concerned that you're going to have trouble keeping the back end in check. Now, with the AJRs, because the back ends are relatively happy already, it's really hard. I found it really difficult to keep the rear in check without scrubbing way too much speed in the front. So I was able to mitigate this, though, and you can see that the temperature deltas between the fronts and the rears for the custom package was only 10C, which is really on the high-end cusp of where I like to see it, especially with GT3 cars. Especially with aero cars, but in this context, anything more, I found like the car just didn't feel right, and it just didn't feel quick. So you're gonna have to live with 10C, but this package should maintain that temperature lap 3 and beyond. Where the default package goes, who knows? The next thing we want to look at is the run tab. We're gonna be looking at the wear. So we're looking at the custom here, and you can see nice, real tight wear distribution between the tires. That means you're using all of the rubber on all of the tires effectively. That's always a good sign. And you look at the custom package, and it's a little bit all over the place. You're getting, 50% more wear out of the out of the rears, almost twice as much wear in the rears as you are in the fronts. That's not a good sign. That means you're going to be pitting more often just to take care of those rear tires. Whereas in the custom package, they're all more even, so you're going to be pitting at a consistent pace, or a consistent place, I should say. Now, speaking of pitting, let's talk about the Honda Turbo now. So this is what I wanted to allude to. Remember, I mentioned before that the Honda Turbo might have better or worse fuel consumption. That's confirmed. The Honda Turbo has the V6 has 3/5 of the fuel consumption as the Honda Turbo does. So in a multiplayer context, if you have a race in the AJR that's 30 minutes long or less, the Honda, you can finish the race with a full tank on rich. The Honda, if you look at the lap time, and this was just a casual run, is around a second faster than the V6 lap for lap, pure pace wise. Now, when you run out of fuel, the weight in the rear changes. When the rear weight of the car gets lighter, the rear end gets happier. When the rear end gets happier, the tires overheat. That's a concern. But the big point here is, if you go over 30 minutes, if you're 31 minutes in a multiplayer context or a league racing context, you're going to be pitting in the Honda Turbo if you stay on rich the whole time. You have to switch to lean, which you might actually just lose that advantage that you had. So 30 minutes or less, Honda Turbo is better and faster. 30 minutes and above, it's one less pit stop. That means you gain 20 seconds of track time in the V6 Turbo. Let's move into the aero. Let's compare the two builds here. I changed a lot on the aero. Went from 5.5 by default to a 3.6. I felt like I had enough aero up front already. I softened the front more with the springs and the ARBs. That gave the front of the car more mechanical grip. That allowed me to reduce the front wing. Seems like one click of rear wing equals 2 clicks of front wing as far as drag is concerned. But comparing the two builds, you can see that there's probably, let's take a look at the end of the straight here. Oh, one of these sections here. It's fine, it doesn't really matter. But I'm trying to get a percentage of rear downforce, and it looks like it's about 15% more rear downforce, but we're also losing front downforce. But like I didn't feel that hurt too much. You could still turn the car just fine at high speeds. The other thing I want to point out is the center of pressure here on the second line here. The red bar is the custom package, and I did push the center of pressure to it be in the high 70s, which is more than I usually like to see. The engine is in the rear, the weight is in the rear, so maybe that's a factor as well. I don't know the exact longitudinal weight distributions of these cars, but I definitely felt an improvement with more rear end aero vis-a-vis ride height or rear wing. So perhaps in the high 70s is where this car likes to be, and if that's the case, then the default package is lower. So the car definitely felt better. That was one of those for feel things that you do when you're putting setups together. The other things, some minor things I'm going to mention next, is the differential. It looks pretty similar across the entire course of the entire lap. The same amount of unlocking in the same places. However, there was one sector that I thought that in particular a differential acting funny is detrimental to the lap time, and that's the Ravazza curves. And you can see here with the custom, we did get some unlocking after the first turn and going into the second. We unlocked when we were turning into that second curve, which is the important exit for the long straightaway. And you want stability there because you want to be able to keep the power down, keep the momentum up. And if you look at the default package, there's a lot more activity through both of the corners. Some of this might be curb work, but it unlocked twice as much going into that last corner. And that means you have to make throttle and wheel adjustments right when you want to be straight and on the power. Finally, let's take a look at the damper histograms. I always go over the damper histograms because it's really crucial to how the cars behave, but it's an often overlooked aspect of setups. It's usually a little too heavy for people to understand, but as usual, the default packages have a strong rebound bias. Here we're looking, these are all the four corners of the car, all the four wheels I should say, and the higher these bars, indicates the stiffer the damping package is. And right in the zero line here to the left of the zero line is all rebound stiffness, and the right is bump stiffness. And so you can see that the front rebound stiffness was extraordinarily high. We have somewhat of a bimodal or close to bimodal damping histogram in the back. That means this indicates that it's a lot more active than it otherwise should be. That means the car's not really coming into the natural mode of the suspension soon enough. So we cleaned everything up just a bit. We kept a little bit of rebound bias on the rears. I don't really think there's anything more that we could do there. Otherwise, we're getting a little bit too... if I added more clicks to bump or reduce the rear the rebound, I'm sure it would still be favoring one way or the other, but this is as close as I could get it. And on the fronts, I tended to favor a stiffer front bump than I did with the front rebound. I don't know why. As far as the telemetry is concerned, that's also another for feel type of adjustment. But you can see in the setup screen the low-speed bump damping is much higher than the rebound. The telemetry reflects a slight bias in favor of the bump. It's not really that big of a deal. So that's some interesting stuff about the AJR V6. Feel free to put in the comments which one of the four is your favorite and why. I'm looking forward to seeing what the Honda's all about in the next multiplayer race I can. And I plan to do a build for all of the AJRs at some point. Keep in mind the time we saved to Imola in the V6, and I have to stress this, it's not a time trial build, and the AJRs all have been nerfed from where they used to be. Coming up, the ultimate build, the Formula Ultimate. The pinnacle of setup challenges will be ready in time for the Belgian Grand Prix. If you are or are not an Ultimate fan for any reason, you will not want to miss it. I was able to make some game-changing adjustments which could arguably put it back on top of the list for modern F1 cars in AMS2. Until next time, Thanks for watching, and take care.